Moments in time that changed the sneaker game forever. This is a multiple part series starting with part 1, and we are going to discuss models that changed the sneaker game forever, this time on Fire Footwear. Welcome back to Fire Footwear, everybody. As always, this is your host, Matt Frates. I hope that this finds you well. And as always, I want to thank you for coming back to this podcast. It means the world to me that I'm able to at least impact at least one of you every so often with the content that I come out with. It may sound silly, but I think the idea of just connecting in general gives people a feeling of being seen, being heard, whatever equivalent is in your life. And I take that very, very seriously. So I want to thank you all for coming back and supporting what we are doing here. I'm going to talk about things that changed the sneaker game forever. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain because as I was coming up with this topic, I saw it as a one-off. And as I started talking to some people, started doing some research, I realized very, very quickly that this was going to be something that could encompass quite a bit of content. Sneakers has been around for a long time, but I think sneaker culture in and of itself, people think of it as what it is today. But in order for us to get to today, we always have to think about where we came from. And that happens in life in general, not just in something like sneaker culture. Sneaker culture is a wonderful thing. It is embedded in popular culture now. And I think it's just embedded in society in general, especially here in the United States, but certainly worldwide. And to think about how we got here, things that changed the game, that help to dictate what the game is like for us today, for those of us who are participating in it, I think you have to look through a lot of the through lines that would come and bring all of this together. In order to do so, I think it becomes multifaceted because I don't think just the shoes themselves are what dictate sneaker culture. Obviously, they are the foundation of what gets us here. But there are so many things, so many people, so many moments that have helped to craft the narrative of what sneaker culture is today. And so as I'm coming up with this, I realized that this is a very large topic, a very all-encompassing topic. And I thought that the best way to start it was to start it with the models that changed the game. If you listened to last episode, or actually the last 2 episodes, you heard me talk a lot about legacy. And I'm talking about the dwindling nature of legacy. Think about Jordan Brand. I asked about whether we're getting close to the point where Michael Jordan's influence just doesn't matter anymore, and whether we needed to move on from Michael Jordan at one point or another. Last week I talked about Nike SB, and in doing so, I ran through the entire legacy in a very, very general way of the Nike SB eras, all the different box eras, all the shoes that came with that, the ones that really stood out in those eras. I got a lot of positive feedback about that episode that really wanted me to dive into this a little bit more. And so in order for there to be a sneaker legacy, in order for there to be sneaker culture, we have to have something that gets us here. And I'm going to start with a model that I think changed the game forever because it really is almost the shoe that started it all. It's one that's been around now for over 100 years, and it's something I don't think that's ever going to go away, and that is the Converse Chuck All-Star, their Chuck Taylor All-Star. This shoe is iconic. There's no other way to put it. But it came out in 1923. So if you really think about it, a shoe that has been around for that long, it's really almost the one that started it all in terms of just sneakers in general. In an earlier episode way back, I talked about the advent of sneakers being associated with thievery, that people who wanted to sneak around quietly would wear these shoes, and that over time, sneakers became something different. We're talking about putting rubbers on the sole and a lot of things like that. And that happened over the course of time before the advent of the Converse Chuck Taylor All-Star. And this shoe, though, has lasted through it all. And it's inspired many shoes. A lot of imitators. If you look at a lot of these high-end fashion brands, almost all of them have a shoe that looks like the Chuck Taylor All-Star. Its iconic nature of the canvas and that rubber toe cap. A lot of it just inspired so many different things. And that shoe has been a classic look. It's fit in just about anywhere. It's fit in almost any fad, any trend, and I don't think the fads or trends dictate how highly regarded that shoe is. And so it's very difficult to talk about where we are in sneakers today without thinking about the Converse Chuck Taylor All-Star, and that's a shoe that I believe will never go away. It will always be around. And it's really the foundation of this house that we are building of things that change the culture forever. And I think if you're going to go to another shoe that changed things forever, it is in 1972. And that is the birth of the Nike Waffle Racer. This shoe is very important if you don't know your sneaker history. Maybe you're new to the game and maybe haven't heard of this. You certainly see the Nike Waffle or a shoe very similar to it on the market today. It's a general shoe, and maybe people don't see it as hype because it's not something that really gets collabed. It's not something that gets a lot of attention from Nike. However, this was the shoe that started Nike. It was released under a brand called Blue Ribbon Sports, and it was created by Bill Bowerman and Phil Knight. And the creation of this actually used a waffle iron to create that traction on the outsole. And why is that important? That's important because traction on the outsole has been huge and evolved ever since that moment. And for somebody to use something that's in their house, a waffle iron, to create something that it ends up being so iconic and so a part of just sneaker function in general, that's a huge moment. This would lead to decades of innovation within outsole technology, and it still continues today. And if you look at the Nike Waffle Racer, I think that it's very heavily influenced, or did heavily influence, the New Balance 576, which is one of their most popular lifestyle models. Not only was this important because of the traction, it was important because this was the shoe that started Nike, and this was Phil Knight's insertion into the sneaker and sportswear branding, and that is huge because without Nike, there really is no sneaker culture the way we know it today, and we're going to get to that a little bit later. So I think this shoe is very, very important. Let's move forward to 1982, and we're talking about the birth of the Nike Air Force One. The Nike Air Force One, which was designed by Bruce Kilgore. To me, the Nike Air Force One is the linchpin that gets us to current sneaker culture. A lot of people feel that it's the Air Jordan 1, but the Nike Air Force One predated that, and if you look at it, there's a lot of influences that went into the Jordan 1 that were seen in the Air Force One. It was a high-top shoe. It was worn on the basketball court. It's Nike's most sold shoe ever, I believe. But in my opinion, it opened the floodgates for so many silhouettes that would follow from Nike's basketball line. And it also, just like the Chuck Taylor, influenced so many things that came after it. There's so many things about it that make it last the test of time. Nike recognizes that they need to go back to the drawing board, is pulling back their production, but people still want Air Force Ones. Maybe now it's the low top, but the high top with the strap and everything, it changed so many different things. And to me, I believe that it made basketball shoes something that could be used not just on the court, but I think seen as a fashion icon as well, because the Air Force One then took over the streets and the hip hop scene later on in the early 2000s, and we talked about that in that episode. It also became a huge icon in the city of Baltimore. That shoe is the linchpin to what got us here today. And that leads us to 3 years later, when one man steps into Nike and ends up changing sneaker culture forever. Michael Jordan steps in, signs the deal, and the Jordan 1 is created. Really, what is left to say about this icon of a shoe? It changed the game in so many ways. It is the start, in reality, of sneaker culture today. The early days of Jordan brand, I don't think are ever going to be eclipsed by any brand. It changed so much. It changed the sneaker game. It changed the way that athletes looked at their shoes. It changed the way that the public looked at the shoes that were on athletes' feet. And it changed how athletes get compensated for their shoes. So many things change. If you look at sneakers today, retros galore, collabs galore, there's really little denying that this shoe is the reason that sneaker culture, the way we know it today, exists. Because without that Chicago, there's something about the way that we see sneakers today that just would not exist, because I think it was so eye-popping. And then it was strapped to Michael Jordan, who had a rocket strapped to his back in terms of his basketball career. So many things are just, this is the history now. And the Jordan 1 is the creation of that. And I'm thinking about it from like a collector's perspective and from the way that people viewed sneakers in general as in terms of popularity. The Air Force One maybe was the model that inspired it and maybe got people to think a little bit differently, but this one being attached to Michael Jordan, who was a name that people knew, it changed the stratosphere forever. And that brings us to 1988. And while there were shoes that released between the Jordan 1 and this shoe is iconic for a specific reason, actually two specific reasons, and this is the Jordan 3. Why is this shoe important? I've actually mentioned it a couple times recently. Number one, it brings Tinker Hatfield into the fold in terms of designing Jordans, and that's really, really important. It's also the debut of the Jumpman logo. Both of these things are important because in the end, they kept Michael Jordan with the brand. After the Jordan 2, he was very, very disappointed with that shoe, just very disappointed with Nike in general. I think he was looking to go in a different direction. And in comes Tinker Hatfield off of designing his own shoe, which was the Air Max 1, and he got specific feedback from Michael Jordan. And what this shoe did with the debut of the Jumpman logo was it made him, Michael Jordan, know that he was the brand. It wasn't Nike that was the brand, it was Michael Jordan that was the brand. That kept him around. The rest is history from there as Michael stayed at Nike. It doesn't mean that sneaker culture wouldn't be what it is today if not for the Jordan 3, but by keeping him at Nike, it allowed Jordan Brand's legacy to build with Nike and to get it to where it is today. We might see a different legacy. He might be with Adidas or some other company. The Jordan 3, though, keeps him at Nike, and to me, keeps sneaker culture to where it is today and on that trajectory. Now, there has been a lot of shoes since then that have come out, a lot of shoes that have really touched popular culture, touched sneaker culture in a way that is influential. And I think over time, we are going to go over those shoes. But if I'm looking at shoes that have been released since 1988 to now that truly changed the game, and when I say changed the game, I mean fundamentally shifted the foundation of sneaker culture at its core. So let's go to 2015, and we're talking about the Yeezy Boost 350. So this is after Kanye West has left Nike and left his own impression on sneaker culture with the Nike Air Yeezy and the Air Yeezy 2. But something about the 350 was so different and so compelling. And now if you look on the streets, I see 350s just about every day. And I think that this created a new competitor to Jordan Brand at the time. While Adidas was always sitting there athletically in terms of their sportswear near Nike or being close to a competitor there, when you talk about sneaker culture, Jordans ruled the day and have ruled the day for a long time. But now the Yeezy 350 has created this shoe that is seen as this lifestyle model with the inclusion of Boost, the comfort, the different look, the knitting, everything about it just hit a home run in the moment. And yes, at the time the 700 came out, a lot of people didn't like those when they first saw them, but the 350, there was something about it. So the 350 and then the 350 V2, there are so many of those. And I think that that truly changed the game because I believe that that shoe became something that people gravitated towards so much that it became such a have-to-have shoe. And I think that it inspired these companies to think a little bit differently about the shoes that they come out with. There have been some imitators, but there has not been a true competitor that has eclipsed the Yeezy 350. And it was the foundation of how Yeezy became the brand that it was up until its demise a couple of years ago. But the Yeezy Boost 350 is one of the things that Kanye said was, I want everybody who wants a Yeezy to get a Yeezy. And while they oversaturated this particular model with tons and tons of colorways, many of them that look similar, this shoe changed things forever because I think so many people who even weren't into sneakers saw it, realized how comfortable it was, and thought, I have to have this shoe. And that brought an even more mainstream feel to sneaker culture. And so that's kind of where we are today. I know a lot of people will disagree. They'll probably want to throw others in, like maybe the Foamposite, maybe the Air Max 1. There's tons of shoes that I went through that I feel could have been included in this episode. But I think what we're going to do is take some of those, and then I think we're going to deep dive into them and maybe get into the history of how they influenced the game, some of the changes that they inspired. But if I'm looking at the ones that truly changed the game, in my opinion, subjective of course, these are the ones that I'm focusing on. And that's how we get to where we are today. And where we are today is a litany of shoes. Anybody who wants shoes can basically get a pair of shoes that they want. Sure, they may not be able to get the most hyped. They may not be able to get the best or all Travis Scotts, but we all have a chance to have some part of sneaker culture because there is something for everybody. And it wouldn't be what it is today without the influence and the change that all of these models, not colorways, models, inspired. And before we get to the end of the episode, let's get to the release of the week. Release of the week, where I like to highlight a shoe that has caught my eye. It's not always hype, sometimes it is. It's just a shoe that I want you to know about. The Nike Cortez is a shoe or a model that has been heavily influential on today's sneaker culture. Maybe it doesn't have the same place as some of the other models that we talked about, or even some other models that we'll get to in future episodes, but the Cortez definitely has a place and should be revered in its own way. And on May 8th, for $110 US, we are going to get the Forrest Gump colorway of the Nike Cortez. This was made very, very popular for its inclusion in the movie Forrest Gump, and it's just an iconic shoe. It's very clean. It's an old school looking model. So if you're looking for a Cortez in your collection, this is one that you should have because this colorway is 100% iconic. So what do you feel are some models that change sneakers forever? Are there ones that I missed, or do you disagree with some of the ones that I have included? I'd love to hear from you. Hit me up on Instagram at FireFootwearPod is the handle to find me there. Follow me, message me. Maybe you can be included in this little chat group that I've created there, which has created tons of avenues for people to talk about sneakers, maybe even with people that they feel seen by because they can't talk about it in their personal life. If you're a Facebook user, Fire Footwear Sneaker Podcast is what you would search. I'd love to see posts. I'd love to see on-feet pics, whatever it is that you want to post there. If you want to go to TikTok and find some reels, at Fire Footwear Pod is the handle for that. If you want to find me personally on Twitter, at Matty Ice is the handle for it. If you want to watch some YouTube videos, search Fire Footwear Sneaker Podcast on YouTube to find the channel. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and engage with the videos. And of course, if you want to support the Matty Ice Media Network, mattyIcemedia.com is the address to support all the other podcasts that we have, including Iceman and Coach and Political Football. Fam, I hope this finds everybody well. I hope this finds everybody safe, and I will talk to you next time. This is Fire Footwear. The opinions and viewpoints expressed on Fire Footwear are those of Matt Frates and his guest, and not necessarily those of the Matty Ice Media Network. Fire Footwear is exclusively owned by Matt Frates and is brought to you by the Matty Ice Media Network.